short trip. So, hello everyone. I'm so happy to see all of you, especially since tonight I will be sharing about the 5 mindfulness trainings. And my guess is that some of you don't have a clue what that is. So I'm going to do my best to share with you what the 5 mindfulness trainings are, how they came to be, and how they might benefit you. So let me begin. When I was thinking about this talk, which I've been doing for more than a week, things were not really coming together. So I decided I'd just trust that I make a few notes, and then, since I'm very familiar with this topic, I'm trusting that I will tell you everything you'd like to know. And of course, there are question and answers at the end. So anything that comes up that you don't understand or you want more information about, just kind of make a mental note and we'll talk about it at the end. So my familiarity with the mindfulness trainings began in 2014. It was at my very first retreat at Magnolia Grove. And when the subject of the mindfulness trainings came up, there were talks about each of them, explaining what they said and that sort of thing. And I thought, well, I'm kind of living that way anyway, so why not? That was kind of presumptuous of me, to say the least, because when I did take the 5 and then began practicing with it, I recognized that, I have been kind of practicing that way, but there was a lot more for me to learn and a lot more for me to recognize within myself. And that's continuing even to this day. Every week we read, every month we read the 5 mindfulness trainings at Inner Being Sangha. And every time we read them, I see things, I feel things, I understand things a little more deeply. So that's something to understand about the 5. The 5 mindfulness trainings originate from Buddhist teachings, which you would expect. I would hope that you would expect that. The Buddha said one time, I teach suffering and the causes of suffering. And that wasn't all there was to it, because once we recognize the causes of suffering, he's given us a lot of teachings about how to alleviate that suffering. So this information about the 5 mindfulness trainings comes from his teaching about things to avoid. In his teachings, a lot of people came to him and asked him questions about all sorts of things, but mostly about how to live in a more ethical way, in a way that would benefit everybody. And one of the things he said was, well, here are some things you could do your best to avoid. Avoid killing, avoid lying, avoid stealing, avoid sexual misconduct, and avoid ingesting toxins. Now that fit the times when the Buddha was teaching, but it doesn't really say enough to us now. We need a little more information. And so Thich Nhat Hanh wrote a more modern version that's relevant to us right now. This little book, the Mindfulness Survival Kit, is a beautiful book that explains the mindfulness trainings, gives us exercises to practice with, and it's just a wealth of information in this little book. I want to read a few things from the book so that you get a sense of why Thich Nhat Hanh did this. This book contains a modern, updated, and secular version of the Buddha's teaching on the 5 precepts, the Buddha's guidelines for an ethical life. And these teachings have been revised a few times. Most recently, just last year, the 3rd mindfulness training was revised. And he goes on to say, my hope is that these mindfulness trainings can represent a Buddhist contribution to a global ethic, a way for the human species to sustain itself in these dangerous and difficult times. And then I wanted to read you this because I find it to be so important. Buddhism was developed as a teaching path rather than a religion. So the first teaching that the Buddha gave was to some friends of his that he had been practicing with. This was kind of the end of his learning. Perhaps I will talk a little bit about the prince who became the Buddha, in case you're not familiar with those stories. So he was born Siddhartha, and he was the prince of the king of that territory. And he lived in a really, we would say, opulent for that time, very safe, walls all around. So all he knew was this wonderful life, surrounded by people who loved him and took care of him. But this changed one day when there was a kind of I got the impression it was sort of a festival that had to do with spring and planting and that sort of thing. And so he went with his father outside the gates to this festival. And this is where he first saw what he came to call dukkha, suffering. I won't go into all of that. You can read about it if you're interested. But he saw various kinds of suffering. And when he asked about it, apparently his father didn't have a good answer. And so I feel like that just sparked within him something that compelled him to learn about suffering and what causes it and what can help to alleviate it. So fast forward quite a few years, and Siddhartha is married. He has a young wife and a baby, and he decides that he really must go on a kind of a quest because he is still longing to understand suffering and why people suffer and how can he help people who are suffering. And so he leaves his cushy home and ventures out. He studied with many, many teachers who were noted at their time, and he learned what they had to teach, but nothing was quite what he was looking for. So he ended up with a group of ascetics who were practicing very, very strict ascetic rules. They ate only what they could forage. Sometimes, according to one of the stories, just 1 grain of rice a day. As you might expect, by I don't know how long, but at some point he was close to dying. And so he's laying under a tree, and a village girl came by and noticed him. And I don't know, she must have been struck by something unusual about this monk. And so she had some milk with her, and she gave him milk to drink. I think there was some stories say it was a kind of almost like a porridge with water, milk and rice, whatever. She gave him nourishment, and for 3 or 4 days, she came back every day and revived him, actually. So then the Buddha went to a place where he felt sheltered under a tree, a Bodhi tree, we're told. And he just determined that he was going to sit there until he understood what he was longing to know. And while he sat, he was tempted by Maya, which is a word for all of these disturbances that we get in our mind. He went through all of that, just sat. And finally, he realized what he wanted to know. And that was that there is suffering, and there are all kinds of suffering, and there is a way to alleviate that suffering. So he talked about that with these friends that he had been practicing with, the friends who were very ascetic. They didn't really want to talk to him at first, but something about him radiated, and they were curious. And so he told them what he had learned, what he had noticed, what he had kind of, so this is how the Four Noble Truths came about and the Noble Eightfold Path. So he said, there is suffering. That's the first. There are causes of suffering. There are ways to alleviate the suffering. And the last one, the Noble Eightfold Path, are the ways to alleviate the suffering. So during his times of teaching, he went through lots of teachings that kind of elaborated on those initial teaching. And so then, after 2,600 years and lots of teachers and some Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, we have this practice that helps us to live in a way that is meaningful, ethical, mindful, and that's where it comes from. Here's an important thing that Ty wrote. I find it important. He said, identifying suffering as it is means that we don't run away from it, and we take steps to be able to transform it. I think that's really, really important. Running away never solves anything. It just kind of prolongs the agony, prolongs the suffering, or adds another layer to it. So I'm going to shift gears a tiny bit. I have been rereading this book by Sister Chen Kong, Thich Nhat Hanh's longtime right-hand lady. It's called Teaching True Love. And right at the very end, she talks about an incident when Ty came through where she was working. And this is what she said. One day in 1981, seeing how absorbed I was wrapping parcels for hungry children in Vietnam, Thich Nhat Hanh asked me, if you were to die tonight, are you prepared? And man, wouldn't you be shocked if somebody came up to you and said that? He said that we must live our lives so that even if we die suddenly, we will have nothing to regret. Chen Kong, you have to learn how to live as freely as the clouds or the rain. If you die tonight, you should not feel any fear or regret. You will become something else, as wonderful as you are now. But if you regret losing your present form, you're not liberated. To be liberated means to realize that nothing can hinder you, even while crossing the ocean of birth and death. Now I read that because one of the ways we suffer is regret. And I don't know if this is true for everybody, but it's certainly true for me. I have struggled to let go of regrets that really just become like a burden that I carry around, mostly on my shoulders. And when I read that, I thought, man, I have a lot of work to do. And then I realized the 5 mindfulness trainings and the 14 trainings that I took as an order of inner being person. These are the things that will help me let go of regrets. So I want to play a song for you, and then we'll talk some more. This is James Taylor, and it's called Walk Down That Lonesome Road.
And online they weren't hearing it.
Oh, oh, too bad.
Okay.
And maybe we could start again. So I'm sorry that you couldn't hear it, but you can always go to YouTube and find it. I wanted to talk about this because when I listened to it, a few days ago when I remembered this song, but I hadn't heard it in a long time. And when I listened to it, I heard the 5 mindfulness trainings, and I heard also this person who has no sangha. he's walking down this lonesome road all by himself. And that's not something that is, we don't have to do that. We have a choice. We have a Sangha. So we have company walking down the road, even if it gets lonesome. And then he says, if I had only listened once or twice. Well, that is actually the fourth mindfulness training. It's called deep listening and loving speech. Then he said, if I had closed my mouth and opened my eyes, and that's the second mindfulness training. It's called true happiness. Then he sings, cooled, if I had cooled my head and warmed my heart. And that is the fifth mindfulness training, which is nourishment and healing. And then they sing, carry on, never mind feeling sorry for yourself. It doesn't save you from your troubled mind. So I just think that's a great illustration of how the mindfulness trainings are relevant in our lives. And I don't know if James Taylor was having these kinds of experiences, but it's all about regret. It's all about what he might have been able to change if he had listened better or opened his eyes or took away some of the anger so that his heart could be warmed. So those are the things that the mindfulness survival kit talks about. These are the things that we will be studying during July. Every Sunday in July, there will be a talk about one of the 5 mindfulness trainings, or sometimes 2 of them. And all of this leads up to the last Sunday in July, when we will actually have a ceremony in which anybody who wants to make a commitment to follow this path will be invited to participate in a ceremony, a very beautiful ancient ceremony that transmits the energy of these trainings to everybody who receives them. So I guess I want to pause here because I have been talking for about 20 minutes or 30, and just see if you have questions that I might respond to.
About knowing it, do you know if the mindfulness is translated in Spanish?
I do not know, Adam. Maybe that's something you could do.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what is the name of the book again?
It's called the Mindfulness Survival Kit. But you can also just download the 5 mindfulness trainings without the book on the Plum Village website. Just go to plumvillage.org, look in the mindfulness section, and you can download the 5 mindfulness trainings. Next week, we will have some flyers to give you with all of the trainings on them. We're going to have a really long wait.
Bobbie, perhaps you could explain when we say take the training, what does that mean? We go off the breath and refer to, you'll hear us refer to having taken them.
Yeah, it's, you might think of it as receiving something that you take on, that you almost like wear. something that that you take on. It's like taking on the, the commitment to do your best to live in this way.
Then bowing in, real quick, about that point about taking these trainings. When it comes to intoxicants like alcohol, how strict is that? Is that zero alcohol?
That's a good question. The trainings are meant to be a guide. They are not like the Ten Commandments, where you're expected to. Of course, nobody seems to live that way, but these are guidelines. It's been explained to me like the 5 mindfulness trainings are like the North Star. You can aim at it, you never get there, but that's your guide. And so the mindfulness trainings are like that. They're a guide. There is no mindfulness training police. So, you do the best you can, and it's up to you to decide whether you're, whether making progress or no progress, or if there are things you can improve. So it's definitely just a personal thing and meant to be a guideline. Now, I will say this, if you, a lot of people kind of shy away from taking the first mindfulness training, which is called Reverence for Life, because it's very specific about no killing. I'll just read part of this, well, maybe the whole thing. Aware of the suffering. They all start with aware of the suffering. Aware of the suffering caused by the destruction of life, I am committed to cultivating the insight of interbeing and compassion and learning ways to protect the lives of people, animals, plants, and minerals. And this is the sentence that kind of hangs people up. I am determined not to kill, not to let others kill, and not to support any act of killing in the world, in my thinking, or in my way of life. And so some people, some of us, choose to become vegetarian in following this guide. I would think that, and this may be just my opinion, so take it like that, just my opinion. But if you wanted to take the first mindfulness training, and even though you might still be eating meat, it would be interesting to see if the mindfulness training began to change your habits. And I'm saying that because I know from other mindfulness trainings that I have practiced, my experiences, my way of relating to the world has changed. And it's not because it's magic. It's just because my being wants to get in alignment with this way of living. And so the mindfulness trainings are a reminder. I'll give you an example. It's probably best, maybe it's more deep listening and loving speech. But, so I am married, and right now my mother is living with us. My mother is 101 years old. She's very healthy, and she's also very independent when she can be, she wants to be. When she came to live with us, I realized that I was a lot more of a control freak than I thought. Because she had things, the way she did things were different than the way I did things, simple things, and I discovered that I was feeling a tinge of anger about it. I was not comfortable with it. And so that caused me to sometimes say things that I regretted later. Um, Thankfully, she didn't take it too seriously, and she's hard of hearing, so maybe she didn't even hear me. But it was affecting me. And so just going back, like I said, one Wednesday night, we're reading the 4th mindfulness training about loving speech and deep listening, and I thought, oh, okay. That's why I'm uncomfortable. I was not, my consciousness, my being did not align with that way of acting, and so I was uncomfortable. Is a way of suffering, I suffered because of it. And thankfully, my mother didn't suffer, but I did, and the mindfulness training helped me to see why. So that is one of the ways that it becomes important and relevant in your everyday life. A long time ago, not too long after I had received the 5 mindfulness trainings, I was driving on 635. This was before all the construction that you see now, but it was still a hectic drive. And there was a big pickup truck just zooming in behind me. It did not seem that it was safe, that he would be able to move into the other lane. This was the kind of thing that typically would make me anxious and angry and want to say something about the way this person was driving. But a curious thing happened. He swerved around me fast into the next lane. And my first thought was, may you get where you're going safely without hurting anybody else. That's a very different saying and I was like, I was shocked that was my first thought. But that's another way that the mindfulness trainings affect our lives. Maybe some of you have an example like that, because I know some of you have taken the 5. I'd be happy to hear them. Yes, Cornell, I'm looking at you.
No, that's great as allowing. Yeah, I'll say a little bit about the 4th one, and for me, and maybe that was the one you worked on too, Bobbie, the deep listening, loving speech and deep listening and interrupts words. And maybe this talks to Adon's question. At first, when they were offered, I didn't know much about them, so I don't want to join a club or sign up for anything. I just came here to meditate. So I didn't, because I didn't quite understand that. And then the next time I went, when it was explained, you're not joining a club or anything. This is you personally. We don't even, all the stuff there was just for you personally, and so I decided to. But really where I was going to address Adon's question was, the one thing to keep in mind is that to take these does not mean I have perfected this, now I can receive it. What it meant was, I can take this as something into my life, and that gives me maybe something to think about perfecting or not perfecting, because we're never there, but to work on it. So it's not absolute. I don't know if that makes sense, but for me it was number 4. And it was at a time when I was working other jobs, and office gossip is a real fun thing to get involved with. And I knew I wasn't perfect at not partaking in office gossip. But when I received that training. It gave me an opportunity to think about it and see if, can I improve? So that's what I think. And I don't want to go on, but I think when I came to them, Bobbie, as well, I thought, oh, I'm already doing most of these, what the heck, let me go. But you're really realizing, huh. And here I am, I received them in 2006, I think, or 2007, and here, however many years later, that is 17 years. Still working on it.
Anybody else want to share a story about the 5?
I'll share.
Thank you, Jen.
June Bowie. Yeah, the loving speech and deep listening, I really love that one. And when I'm driving, and we all know what it's like driving lately in DFW area, my practice is not to the point that the automatic thought is, may you get to a place safely. Sometimes I notice myself first, anger coming up in this precarious situation. Somebody is being impatient and cutting in and doing this maneuver that makes me feel unsafe. But then I can take a deep breath and say, may we both become more patient. That way we have a common ground with this person instead of thinking of that person as the enemy or other names. So may we all grow patient, may we all be safe. So that's been my secondary reaction rather than automatic reaction, and that's why I continue practicing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's the practice of interbeing is woven into all of this, so that we begin to recognize that we are not alone. We're not walking this lonesome road all by ourselves. And being on the highway is a great example of how my safety and your safety are the same thing. You know, if anybody makes a mistake, lots of people pay for it. So it's really a good lesson in intervening, as well as patience and loving kindness, and those lovely things.
Michael, again. First of all, let me say that the ceremony is absolutely beautiful. So you don't have to take all of them, all 5. You can take 1 or however many you want to take. So I'd encourage you to think about it. But one thing it's done for me, if I'm at home and I see an insect, a spider, or an ant, or a mosquito, and before I took the trainings, I might kill the insect. Now, the first thing that comes into my head is, reverence for life. And I let it go. I don't touch it. Just let it go.
Yeah, we rescued a little gecko that got into the house yesterday. Took him and put him back outside.
Jake Doggan?
Yes, Jake.
I guess my question is, so we're talking about taking on these mindfulness trainings. And I think you've spoken before about kind of having a mentor in this process. Or as far as what we're talking about today, is it more of just like take this practice into your life and just kind of work on it? I guess my question. And without a mentor, because I think in my head I'm thinking the way to go about it would be to have a mentor. But if you don't have a mentor, I guess my question would be, how do you stay consistent with these kind of practices? Because, you know, it's something that I think about. I'll read a book that, whether it's along the lines of the mindfulness trainings or something that I want to, you know, practice and, you know, be consistent with, but I find myself doing it for a few weeks and then kind of not thinking about it as much or meditating differently, or, you know, just thinking about the next thing I can do that's healthy or good for me.
Right.
How do we stay consistent with these practices?
Well, that's a really good question. Thank you. So in this, typically, there's not what you call a mentor, but there are all of the kinds of people you can get help from, you know. So anybody in the Sangha, anybody you trust, you know, you can talk about it with them. On Wednesday night, the Interbeing Sangha reads and discusses them every first Wednesday of the month. So that's another reason you get in the practice by working with people, you know, the interbeing aspect of it. And it's like anything else, you know, it's like exercise. You might start on an exercise program and you're doing great for 3 weeks or a month, and then all of a sudden something changes and you can't go, and so, you know, anything falls apart. Well, this is the same thing. It's a practice, and the practice will wane, you know. You'll be diligent with it for a while, and then you'll relax for a while, and then you'll go, oh yeah, I need to get back. So, you know, just expect life goes on, you know. Just because you receive these trainings, things don't magically happen. It takes practice, but you have a lot of support in your practice. You have all of us. You have me, Cornell, June, you know, always here to help. So that's a good question, and that's why we call it a practice.
June bowing in. Thank you, Bobbie, for touching on some of the discomfort people feel as they reflect on reverence of life. Perhaps coming from perfectionist, like I've got to be perfect kind of space, but I don't know. So I'm going to start with a question, and I will context and return to the question. So,
Okay.
apologies in advance if I'm too verbose. I'll try to keep it down. So my question is regarding true love of the 5 mindfulness training. I was wondering if there is a good resource to deep dive in some of the philosophical rationale from Plum Village that I could read more upon. And where I'm coming from is that I really love the Taoist Meditation Center makes space for free thinking and reflection to take the value as theirs. And I love that we have space for some of the religious trauma and something that comes up. And when I read True Love portion, there's this passage about I will learn how to channel my sexual energy appropriately or properly. And sometimes it makes me wonder, like, what does that mean? And what comes up for me is the really repressive culture that I grew up in, and really repressive religious context that I grew up in, where it just didn't exist, pretending that didn't exist. So that's why I would love to deep dive to really investigate what this passage means, along with my own self-reflection on what that means for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to see if you have any good pointers to deep dive on true love or otherwise.
Well, we'll see. Well, you know that the 3rd mindfulness training was recently edited, changed. And that was a good change because the previous one, which is still in this book, by the way, the mindfulness training said something about here's the sentence you said. I am committed to learning appropriate ways to take care of my sexual energy and to cultivating loving kindness, compassion, joy, and inclusiveness which are the four basic elements of true love. The my greater happiness and the greater happiness of others. But there was a part in this mindfulness training that was difficult for some people because it said, I am determined not to engage in sexual relations without true love and a deep long-term commitment made known to my family and friends. And that was challenging because a lot of people who are involved in same-sex relationships or like any kind of relationship that's not the quote normal, sometimes they don't have the support of their family and friends. And finally, the Plum Village recognized that was something that needed to be changed. And so that's been rewritten. And it says something about the support of, it's more like a support system than specifically naming family and friends. So they've come a long way keeping these mindfulness trainings relevant. So the thing that comes to mind first is do no harm. That's one of the things the Buddha said. I forgot the other part is do no harm and then cultivate the mind. But that is, to me, do no harm to yourself, to the other person, to, you know how things like that ripple out. So thinking about if this way of engaging is going to be harmful, even if you can look farther down the line and see that it would be, then best to refrain. So that's kind of my take on it. You have time for one more question or reflection? I want to say this one thing about the quality of the mindfulness trainings being like a guiding star that you never get to. You're not ever going to be perfect, probably, with these mindfulness trainings because we'll always see something in there that we didn't catch before. But we say at the end of every meeting, this closing chant. Countless beings we vow to free. Ceaseless afflictions we vow to end. Limitless Dharma doors we vow to open. The deepest paths of awakening we vow to realize. So, can we do that? Will we ever free countless beings? Will we ever end afflictions? You know, it's like, that's the Bodhisattva vow. It's what we do in spite of the fact that we know we're on a very probably unending quest. It's just what we do. We do our best. And I think our best gets better over time because we are practicing. Any last minute? Yes.
So a few, I don't know if they're last minute, but it was kind of what I think are deeper meanings that I really started thinking about engaging myself in the world more. Sometimes when we think of the first one, killing, oftentimes we come to vegetarian. If we go to the last one on toxins, we go to alcohol. But really, we look at the first one, killing. It's like there's lots of killing in the world. Our government kills people. Homeless people are left to die. There's war, there's all of that, which I myself, what can I do about it? But do I benefit somehow from it? Does some of my work that I have done in the past in technology that is used by government, military, what was my engagement there? How do I benefit? How do I suffer? Toxins, yeah, there's the alcohol thing, the obvious, but we also, things that we view, things that we read, things that we support. Those are intoxicating, or things that we enjoy. We could think of movies and stuff like that. And one that I think of a lot lately is the second one, which is about exploitation. And I think of the clothing we wear, most of it doesn't come from this country. It comes from countries with history of underage employment, which is exploitation, taking away someone's, freedoms. Stuff. So it's like there's bigger ways. How do I engage in the world? I can't fix that by myself.
Right.
But these give me an opportunity to realize where my clothing came from. What acts of killing have made my life better here.
Yeah, in all those ways, the trainings do make us more mindful. All right, thank you so much for listening and talking and sharing. I'm glad I was able to share this with you.
Thank you, Bobbie. Let's go to announcements, and let me first say that please remember to practice dana, the cultivation of giving. And we don't require anyone to donate to come to our Sangha, to come here this evening. You're not required to donate, but we ask you to give what you can, because by giving what you can, you allow people who may not be able to afford anything to come and attend our program. So whatever you can afford to donate is appreciated. Would consider becoming a monthly donor, all the better.